Charlie, another question comes in from Chris Freed of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He says, you've recommended the use of an index fund for the average investor. As these index funds continue to expand in size, their influence on corporate boards and ultimately management is ever increasing. This concentration of voting in the hands of a few index funds is alarming to me. Do you see this concentration as alarming as well? And what reforms would you suggest to address that issue?
Well, of course, it's a very serious issue because it's an enormous amount of power. And for a while, all these index funds got the feeling they were suddenly made godlike to clean up the world. But Vanguard has retreated from that policy, and I think wisely so. And I have some hope that Larry Fink will follow. I don't think it's smart for these index funds to try and influence the policy and politics of the country just because they're an index fund. I think they should be satisfied to eliminate some of the folly from investment management and do a better job for their clients, which I think they do very well. And I think they should be pleased with that and not try and run the whole damn country as a matter of corporate governance. I have no feeling that anybody at Vanguard or Larry Fink's operation has any special genius at how American corporations ought to be run. And to the extent they ask Berkshire to do this or that, I wish they'd stop.
Ask Berkshire to do what? To follow their guidance?
Yeah. I'm just not interested in their views as to how Berkshire should behave.
All right, this next question comes from Karsten Fedorov, who's an equity analyst from Germany. And his question is, stock-based compensation is a popular means of incentive compensation in many companies. In some cases, these take on alarming proportions. It feels like companies are competing to outbid each other. In some companies, 20% of sales are paid out in stock-based compensation. How do you perceive this development in recent years, and what's a healthy level of incentives?
Well, I think you will find in American corporations very good incentive systems, and others that are too liberal, and others that are too niggardly. And what else would you expect of human nature but a certain amount of variety? And I agree that some of this, in many a corporation, everybody would vote to being allowed to have stock-based compensation. You didn't count it in computing the earnings. They just want any damn way of making the earnings appear higher. It's just human nature. Of course they want it's like your little kid goes off to school, they want to bring him good grades, not bad grades. And so it's sure, there's a big problem of excess corporation pay in some places. Other places, like Costco, I would say the compensation system is damn near perfect. And there's a fair amount of stock, but we always buy in enough stock in Costco to pay for the stock we're issuing. A lot of people in high tech, they issue the stock and they don't buy it in, so it's a net dilution. I think there's a lot that's wrong in American compensation systems, but why wouldn't there be?
Yeah.
By the way, when I was young, it wasn't so bad.
Why?
This is something that's happened in the last 50 years. I don't know, it's just the history of the way things came up and the greater hardship and the pioneering ethos, or God, whatever it was. When I was young, nobody complained about executive compensation. Now practically everybody in the investment world thinks in many cases the executive compensation has gotten too high. Take General Electric in its heyday. Think of all the big compensation packages they paid, and think of how they were phoning up the earnings and so forth to pay for it. And it was disgusting. And of course, if that kind of crap creeps in everywhere in our civilization, the civilization will perish. We need more honor, not less. But I have no suggestion as to how to fix the places where it's excessive. It's a difficult issue, really difficult.
Jeffrey Malloy writes in and asks this question. He's from San Francisco. He says, do you think Elon Musk's ownership of Twitter, specifically his hands-off approach to content moderation, is good or bad for American society?
Well, you know, I don't use Twitter, and so I'm not a good judge on that subject. And my policy on Elon Musk is that he's a very talented man, but also peculiar. And so I don't buy him and I don't sell him short. I just say, well, he's a very unusual person.
You said some nice things about him the last time I talked to you and what he's done with Tesla.
Oh, it's unbelievable. Who else has done it except BYD? It just shows how tough capitalism is. Even if you're a genius like Musk is in some ways, there's always some little BYD that comes out and does better. Capitalism is not easy.
All right, this question came in from Jeremy Salzberg in Costa Mesa, California. He says, Charlie, last year in 2022, a Missouri court awarded a victim $5.2 million in compensation from Berkshire subsidiary Geico after a woman was infected with an STD in a car that was insured by Geico Auto Insurance. The claimant says that the man was negligent and didn't tell her about his health diagnosis. Your grandfather was a judge and you have a background in law. Did the Missouri court get this verdict right?
Well, I would doubt it myself, but it's in the nature of things that not every court is going to be right in every verdict or every judgment. And I do think that allowing you raised a very tough subject. You will get occasional verdicts that are just totally outrageous, and that's inevitable. And of course, that's what appellate courts are for. But sometimes the appellate courts are very sympathetic with crazy verdicts. Again, I can't fix everything that's wrong with human life, including a few crazy verdicts.
You'd put that in the category of a crazy verdict, though?
Yeah, sure.
This question comes from Stefan Armand, who is writing in from Toronto. There was a lot of excitement about the relationship between Berkshire and 3G for the Kraft Heinz transaction. Has your perception of the private equity business changed on the back of that partnership?
Well, like every other human being on Earth, some deals work out better than others for 3G. And they would love to have a way of going back and turning all their bad deals into good deals. Berkshire would like to have the same option. We don't get it either. Averaged out, 3G did pretty well. But recently they've had their approach hasn't worked as well in recent years as would be ideal. Again, welcome to human life. It isn't so damned easy.
Art Presser writes in and says the Florida governor and legislative body has recently taken a stand to try and control Disney's exclusive self-governing authority, previously set up in Florida under the founder, Walt Disney. As your organization, and I guess by this they mean DJCo, still owns Disney shares, you think Disney shares are still a good investment given this backdrop?
We've never owned Disney shares.
That's my mistake, then.
Daily Journal. No, but Disney is an interesting case. Practically every business that Disney has gotten tougher than it used to be. Again, welcome to human life. Think of how Disney once owned the world. Lion King was running a long run on the theater district of New York. They went from triumph to triumph, marching. All of a sudden, on practically every front, it's more difficult. This is what happens. Imagine Kodak, which totally dominated photography in the world, and they invented this new technology. Kodak wiped out its common shareholders.
You think Disney's headed down the same path, or you think that they'll be able to pivot? I mean, I know you followed the company closely.
I think Disney has a lot of assets in it, but it's unpleasant to have something. How would you like running the sports ESPN now at Disney compared to its heyday? It's going to be way harder for them.
The stock's up this year.
Movies look to me like it's going to be a bloodbath too. So it's not a bit easy. And it was easy. In the heyday of ESPN, Disney made nothing but money out of ESPN. It was a total gold mine.
What about other movie businesses? I'm thinking of Paramount, which is a huge holding that Berkshire now owns. Recent.
I live within a few blocks of Paramount Studios. And I don't even know anybody at Paramount. I have avoided the movies like the plague as an investor all my life. I've never made an investment in a movie business in any way, shape, manner, or form. It always gives me the will it was. I don't like the unions. I don't like the crazy agents. I don't like the goddamn crazy lawyers. I don't like the crazy movie stars. I don't like the people who sell dope to the musicians. I mean, everything about it is not my culture. I liked those old English actors when they came over. You know, I grew up with them. But basically, movies is not my scene, so I've avoided it. It's always been very hard for the people who put up the money. It may be a very good place to make a living as an actor or a writer or something or a musician, but it's a hard place to make money if you're an investor.
This one's an interesting question. It came in from Eric Howe in Milwaukee, who says the population of the world is thought to have increased by more than fourfold time since you were born. Mind you, I'm not holding you personally responsible, but there has been that magnitude of growth. Is there a point where the biggest existential threat to humanity is the growth of the population and humanity? If so, how do we discern when that point has arrived?
Well, that's an interesting subject. If you'd looked at the way things had happened in the past, you would have concluded, like Paul Ehrlich did, that the world's headed for an absolute population disaster. But what actually has happened is quite different. What's happened is that as the world has gotten more and more prosperous, including in places like China, the birth rate has gone down, 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 down. And so that there's actually sort of a population shortage in a place like Japan. So the prediction of all the great experts based on extrapolating the past graphs, they turn out to be totally wrong. It now looks as though the world's population in the advanced countries will sort of self-limit.
I mean, that kind of puts you in the same camp with Elon Musk. He's made some of the same arguments, that it's really shrinking population that's a bigger threat to humanity.
Well, as I said, he's a smart man. Sometimes. sometimes, like all the rest of us.
Denny Poland writes in and says, when assessing the character and competence of a business's management, have you ever made a mistake? If so, when did this occur, and what did you learn from the experience?
Well, everybody makes mistakes. And I'd say one of the most interesting things that happened in my lifetime was the rise of IBM and the fall of IBM. IBM was the most admired company in America for most of my young life. They just marched from triumph to triumph to triumph. And in the last 10 or 15 years, they've slipped, and they're falling back in relation to other people in their field. As the Apples and the Googles and so forth came ahead, IBM they kind of missed the boat. I think that's almost inevitable. Kodak missed the boat of the change to digital photography too. And I've heard Bill Gates say that it's almost the rule that if a really disruptive technology comes along, the incumbents screw up their reaction to it. It's hard to change your ways when they've been successful for a long time and go into a totally different way of behaving and thinking.
All right, this question.
Look at where we're sitting. We're sitting in Daily Journal Corporation. We're adapting to the new world. Think how different it is publishing a newspaper and inventing software for courts to automate. These are two radically different businesses.
This question comes in from someone named Jean, who says, Mr. Munger, do you think that currently in the United States we have systemic racism?
We have what?
Systemic racism?
Well, I suppose we've got some, sure. Of course you're going to have a certain amount of animosity, one group toward another. In the whole history of the human race, we've had a certain amount of that. I think it's gotten way better in my lifetime, however. I would argue that the racism has gone down. A lot.
Charlie, this question comes in from Neil Das, who says, what, if any, impact do you think the insurance industry will see because of climate change over the next 25 years?
Well, I'm not sure I am any good at answering that kind of a question.
Are you raising rates at any of the Berkshire insurance companies?
I don't think I know particularly how well. I think there's a good chance that climate change will be less important than a lot of people think. That doesn't mean it'll be unimportant, but I think it won't be an absolute full-blooded horror capacity with no possibility to adjust.
I wait because sometimes when I wait, you say more on things. But I'll give you time to...
No, it's all right.
Okay. Let me get to this question from Tony Huang. He says that he's teaching the introduction of personal finance and the introduction of corporate finance to undergraduates at Indiana University in Bloomington. Most of his students are non-finance majors, and this will likely be the only finance class that they take in college. What should he teach them, incorporating as many writings and speeches that you've given over the years so that they have the foundations and common sense to effectively deal with their personal or corporate finance problems later in life?
Well, that's a good question because it's a big question. And if you have good judgment, your life will work a lot better than if you have bad judgment. And you get good judgment gradually over time, partly by making bad judgments and having them work out poorly. And so my counsel has always been to start trying to be better and keep trying to improve all your life, and you got about half a chance. If you don't do that, you got like no chance. And so I used to say I can only teach what the other person almost knows. Then I can just throw him over the brink when he's hanging on the edge. But if the guy is not within miles of even starting, I never make any public. I never succeed. So in removing idiocy, I have a 100% failing talent. I've never succeeded.
What would you push in that direction if you've got a class full of finance students in college? Maybe what are a few lessons you can?
I would teach to the people who can learn, and if the others couldn't keep up, the hell with them. It can't be improved, can't be improved. I don't believe in butting my head against the wall. And that, by the way, that's the way most education works. They just throw out those who can't keep up. That's the way academia works. That's the reason it gets so good at the top. I talked yesterday on Zoom with a law professor at a great place. My God, this is an admirable guy, and he's just so goddamn smart and balanced. It's incredible. But he's a very senior law teacher at one of the great law schools of the world. So I would expect him to be pretty good, but he was more than pretty good. He was awesome. And I thought, my God, academia is quite competitive, you know. By the time you get to the top of the professors at a good place, you find some very remarkable people. But they can't. There's a limit to what they can accomplish. One of the reasons that they turn out such good people is they take in such good people. That's their secret. They can't fix the clods. Nobody can.
Tough love.
There's an old saying, dumb is forever.
Dumb and diamonds. Alejandro Salcedo writes in, he says, reading many entrepreneurs and famous people, they always say that you have to dream really big. Instead, you say, Charlie, that the secret to a happy life is having low expectations. Could you please expand on that?
Well, yes, and you climb as hard as you can by just advancing 1 inch at a time. That's the secret of life. And now there's always somebody who's a little nuts and who succeeds. But for every guy who succeeds, there are 1,000 failures.
Is this an under-promise, over-deliver situation, too?
Well, of course, who in the hell in his right mind would like going around making a lot of commitments and failing time after time after time at doing what you'd promised to do? Everybody would hate you, right? There's no more guaranteed way to make people hate you than to fail them in their reasonable expectations. So, of course you want to live a life where by and large you're meeting the reasonable expectations of other people. That's what civilization requires of all of us.
Charlie, someone named Joe wrote in from China, and he says he's an investor from China. He's sorry that he can't see you face to face this year. He wants to ask you a question about life during the pandemic. He says, I always give bits of advice to the elders in my family, like avoiding high temperatures and falling down at home. But during the pandemic, especially since China reopened, I can seldom give them any advice except stay at home and get vaccinated. So, as a wise elder yourself, did you get COVID during the pandemic, and how do you stay healthy? What's your advice to these elders?
I did get COVID, but I got it after I was vaccinated, and I had like a tiny sniffle for about 10 minutes, and that was my COVID. But I tested positive during that time. And in terms of the general idea of cautious adjustment, I've had a lot of elderly friends who either died or had terrible injuries from falls. And so when I got old myself, and it got time to use something to avoid falling down, people tried to sell me on the cane. But I noticed that my friends who used canes would fall down occasionally. So I never used the goddamn cane. Instead, I bought one of these modern walkers, and wherever I was worried about falling down, I pushed my walker. I did that for 6.5 years. I never fell down once in 6.5 years, just because I was more cautious. That is my advice to old people, just be a little more cautious. Now I've gone to the wheelchair, and I've got another 6.5 years probably, but some of it I've already used up. And I'm just as cautious with my wheelchair. What is the harm of having a little extra caution?
Makes sense. I want to pivot to a question from Frank Wang in Houston, Texas. This is a question about Berkshire. He said, Berkshire previously took a position in Exxon and then exited fairly quickly. If I recall correctly, he says, I believe you had stated that Berkshire thought it was a good alternative to cash at the time. Is the same type of thinking with Berkshire's new position in Occidental and Chevron? Is it the same type of thinking, or is it likely to be more of a long-term type of holding for Berkshire going forward?
Well, that is a very good question. And I think having a big position in the Permian Basin through those two companies is likely to be a pretty good long-term hold. So I like that aspect of that position. And Ben Graham used to say, if it's a good investment, it may be a good speculation. And I think that's generally true, but I don't do those short-term speculations, at least not very often. But I like the big position that Berkshire has in the Permian through those two. I kind of admire both places a lot. Both Occidental and Chevron are very admirable places. And by the way, Oxy didn't start like that. Yeah. If you go back 30 or 40 years, Oxy was owned by a crook. And it's evolved into a wonderful place, but it started as a sleazebag.
Who was running it 30 or 40 years ago?
A man named Armand Hammer.
Oh.
Before your time, Becky, you're too young.
I know, Armie Hammer, the younger one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway.
All right. Paul D. writes in, and I believe it's Paul Damakop, says, Charlie, you're largely credited with Warren Buffett's evolution to buying great businesses at a reasonable price, or in simple terms, a willingness to pay up for a great business. Given Ben Graham's exceptional insights and understanding of investing, how or why did he himself not evolve to foresee the inability to scale his net cigar butt approach? What do you attribute your early willingness to pay up stems from?
Well, remember, a lot of Ben Graham's rise in life was during a period when there was plenty of low-hanging fruit among mediocre businesses that were way too cheap. And he was relatively rare in doing his hunting in that garden. And so he made a pretty good living for himself buying these What happened is that low-hanging fruit eventually went away as the aftermath of the Great Depression went away. And Ben Graham actually made more than half of all the money he made in his life out of one stock. And that stock was Geico, which was a great business. So if you actually look at the great man's own life, you see that what he taught wasn't the way he got rich himself. And by the way, he told that story on himself late in life. He carefully computed how much he'd made in Geico compared to everything he had ever done in his previous life. And so you can argue that Ben Graham himself woke up once.
Why do you think that you, so early on, were willing to come up with this idea of paying up for great businesses?
Well, because it's so obvious, and I'm good at doing things that are obvious. Of course, it was obvious that if you wanted to have a particularly good result, you got to do a great company. You know, I recognize that greatness was good. You know, big deal. Charlie Munger, genius, recognizes greatness is good. Of course, greatness is good.
Paul Iene from Toronto, Canada, writes in and he says, when you're evaluating a company for potential investment, what do you place the most emphasis on, the business or the management? And do you differ with Warren when it comes to what you place first?
No, I don't. I think we're the same. I think we like the business great first. And then second, we want a great manager. But we have not made a huge success by investing on great managers who take over lousy businesses. That is not the way we rose.
Matt McAllister writes,
if you're a lousy manager, you really need a great business.
and can a great business be run by a lousy manager? The inverse?
So, sometimes. Coca-Cola was run for years by a man with very severe mental impairment. And the directors just assumed he was drunk and let him stay there year after year. Now that's my idea of a wonderful business, that you can be mentally defective and run it pretty well. That was Coca-Cola in its heyday.
How far back were we talking?
Well, 25 years.
I'll let somebody else do the math on that, figure out the timing. Matt McAllister writes in and says, Charlie, you've described too much diversification as diversification, being at best an average return producing strategy. In light of that thought, if one was allowed only one stock to hold for a very long time and it would be the most important asset to him and his family and their future well-being, please describe what you would look for in that stock or company. And also talk about the features that you would consider most important when you're trying to figure that out.
Well, it helps to have somebody that's lucked into a good position. So a great business would be what you'd like, and of course you'd like a great management too. And occasionally we've had both to ride together for a long, long period. But of course, everybody's looking for the same thing. And the trouble with it is you will find when you get into those good businesses, places picked over and analyzed as American stocks are. You can imagine the amount of time spent thinking about American stocks. And you will find, by and large in America, if it's really a great business, it's at least 25 times earnings and maybe 30 or 35 or something. So that makes it much harder, of course, because if something goes wrong, you can lose a lot of your investment. And of course, that's what makes investment so difficult, is the fact that the good businesses don't stay cheap. You got to somehow recognize a good business before it's recognizable as a good business. That's very hard to do. Some people get good at it, but not many. I don't think I would want 95% of the people who are America's professional asset managers, I wouldn't want working for me.
Really?
I think it's that hard. I think you need to be in the top 5% to have a reasonable chance. It's very difficult. Now, it's not difficult to just buy an index fund and sit on your ass. That's the great default position.
Your assets?
And by the way, that's if you look at the Daily Journal Corporation. We just put in a 401k plan. What are the investment options for the people at work? Zero. It's all index funds.
And if you
what percentage of American 401ks have our plan? Index funds required. About zero. Am I right or am I wrong? Well, of course I'm right. It's the logical thing to do.
Okay, so percent worth 2 and 20.
Sometimes. Being worth 2 and 20, I would say that is way less than 5%. The man who's worth 2 and 20, that's getting very rare indeed. Particularly under modern conditions where every niche is occupied. You really, if you take early stage venture capital like Sequoia does, how many people have a Sequoia-like record? I don't think there's one in 100 that has a Sequoia-type record.
Chris Freed from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania writes in and says, you've said previously that
And by the way, even Sequoia makes an occasional mistake. Everybody does.
But overall, you still think it's worth it?
Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So Chris Freed writes in from Philadelphia and says, you've said previously that you should destroy at least one good idea that you have each year. What good idea did you destroy in 2022 and anything in 2023 so far?
Well, the idea that I destroyed, it wasn't a good idea, it was a bad idea. When the internet came in, I got overcharmed by the people who were leading in the online retailing. And I didn't realize it's still retailing. It may be online retailing, but it's also still retailing. And I got a little out of focus. And that made me overestimate the future returns from Alibaba. And so I have never gotten so I eliminate mistakes.
I think I just lost Charlie's audio.
When I do those, I keep rubbing my own nose in my own mistakes like I am doing now because I think it's good for myself.
I can't hear. You can hear me, but I can't hear you. You dropped out during that last question. Can you do me a favor? Just raise your hand if you can hear me.
I can hear you.
Charlie
fine.
can hear me. I'm not hearing him. So if you guys can call and I'm hooked in directly to the line. Now I'm hearing program, not this program. I'm hearing live on air program coming from here, music that's coming in. Charlie, I'm going to ask you another question just so that everybody else doesn't have to listen to me talking this through. We're going to try and get this fixed here in the control room. But this question comes in from, let's go to this one. Chris Benassi, who asked the question about, he says, hi, Charlie, a notable theme during the last Daily Journal conversation revolved around positive and negative trade-offs between different systems, frameworks, and choices. Can you discuss your views on the healthcare industry, specifically the trade-offs between capitalist systems like the United States and single-payer systems like Canada in the UK? And I'm asking this single-payer healthcare question because for those who don't know, you served for a long time as chairman at a hospital in Los Angeles, so you do have some insights into what this situation is. And feel free to talk a long time while they're fixing this.
Well, yes,
I don't hear anything.
When somebody asked Warren what happened when their experiment with J.P. Morgan Chase and Amazon and so forth, and they were going to change. improve the what was wrong with the American medicine and its cost. And when they gave that up as a total failure, Warren just said the tapeworm won. And that's what happens. I think the American system costs way too much. Can you hear me?
Charlie, I see your lips have stopped moving. Yeah. So I'm going to ask another question.
Yeah.
I'm hearing power lunch in my ear right now, if anybody's paying attention in the control room. But this question comes in from Brad Heck. Brad Heck is in South St. Paul, Minnesota, and says, Charlie, I'm a big fan of your disciplined approach to life. Do you get up at the same time every day and go to the bed at the same time? And finally, what's the first thing you focus on each day?
Well, I vary a little in my time, but I'm pretty regular. And I'm a pretty good sleeper in my old age, so I'm very lucky in that respect. And
see, your lips have stopped moving, so I'm going to ask.
No, I stopped talking.
I got you. Ah, finally. I hear you. Okay, Charlie, let me ask you this question.
We got sound again.
Yeah, I've got you.
Modern technology. It
yeah,
really works.
I know. You'd think we'd be a little better at this. Sometimes it works. Jim Newell writes in and said, if you could inaugurate anyone for president in 2024, who would you choose?
Well, I think I'll duck that one. I don't want to get into presidential politics.
Okay, I hear that. I can understand that. Charles writes in and says, first of all, he wants to thank you, Charlie, for gifting some DJ Co shares to establish that new Daily Journal Management Equity Incentive Plan. You talked about that earlier on. He said, additionally, he's excited about the rumored new edition of Poor Charlie's Almanac. First of all, is that true? But the real question he has for you, he said, you said that you admire Benjamin Franklin. Can you please elaborate on this subject and highlight the qualities that you admire in Ben Franklin?
Well, Ben Franklin was a genius. It was a small country, but remember, he started in absolute poverty. His father made soap out of the carcasses of dead animals that stank. Now, that is a very low place to start from. And he was almost entirely self-educated, 2 or 3 years of primary school, and after that he had to learn it all himself. Well, to rise from that kind of a starting position and become, by the time he died, he was the best inventor in his country, the best scientist in his country, the best writer in his country, the best diplomat in his country. You know, thing after thing after thing, he was the best there was in the whole United States. So he was a very unusual person. And he just got an extremely high IQ and a very kind of pithy way of talking that made him very useful to his fellow citizens. And he kept inventing all these things. Imagine inventing the Franklin stove and bifocal glasses and all these things that we use all the time. I'm wearing bifocal glasses as I'm looking at you. These are Ben Franklin glasses. What the hell kind of a man that just goes through life and his sight gets a little perfect? He invented the goddamn bifocals. And it was just one of his many inventions. So he was a very, very remarkable person. And of course I admire somebody like that. We don't get very many people like Ben Franklin.
No. I'm thinking the library system.
He was the best writer in his. He was the best writer in his nation, and also the best scientist, and also the best inventor. When has that ever happened again?
Yeah.
Yes, yes. All these other things, yes.
So is there a new edition of Poor Charlie's Almanac?
And he played 4 different musical instruments.
That part I didn't know.
Everything else.
Yeah, that part I did not know.
One of which he invented.
Which
he invented. The glass thing that, you know, when he rubbed his fingers on the glass, and they still play it occasionally.
Yeah. With like different layers of water in it.
Not only, but he actually played on 4 different instruments.
Yeah, and he was a diplomat and helped write the rules of the country, and taught us about compound interest with the trusts that he set up for both Philadelphia and for Boston that still hundreds of years later are paying out.
No, he was a very amazing person. And of course, the country was glad that we were lucky to have him.
Is it true? Is there a new Poor Charlie's Almanac coming out?
Well, they're creating an online edition.
Okay. You've talked about some...
By the way, the Chinese edition sold way more than the one in the United States.
Well, there's more people there.
That's not the sole reason.
Why else?
Well, a rich old man looks like Confucius. In their system, there's nothing better than a rich old man.
Yeah. Charlie, Sang Park writes in a question, and this is about delayed gratification. Taken to the extreme, how rational is it for a person of your age and wealth to practice delayed gratification? If it's not rational at your age, how is it rational to delay gratification for the average adult? So what's the rational point in life to live with no delayed gratification too?
I'm still doing now that I'm old, I buy these apartment houses. It gives me something to do. And we're different from the way we run them and the way everybody else runs them. Everybody else is trying to show high income so they can have high distributions. We're trying to find ways to intelligently spend money, to make them better. And of course, our apartments do better than other people do because the man who runs them does it so well for me. There are two young men that do it with me. But it's all deferred gratification. We're looking for opportunities to defer. Other people are looking for ways to enjoy. It's a different way of going at life.
Did you start out that way?
By the way, you get more enjoyment out of my life doing it my way than theirs. What?
Did you start out having to work at delayed gratification, or is that just how you were born?
No, I learned this trick early. And, they'd done that experiment with the 2 marshmallows with little kids.
Yeah.
How
long can you sit?
2 marshmallows if you wait.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they've watch them how they work out in life by now. And the delayed the little kids who are good at diverting the marshmallows are also the people that succeed in life. It's kind of sad that so much is inborn, so to speak. But you can learn it to some extent too, so.
I'm gonna go home and test that out on my kids. See who does well.
I was very lucky. I just naturally took to deferred gratification very early in life, and of course it's helped me ever since.
Matt McAllister writes in and says, first, thank you for sharing your wisdom. Those of us fortunate enough to listen have benefited significantly. We've come to know Warren Buffett as a learning machine because of your candid descriptions. Aside from this quality, what others would you credit to Warren that has helped make him one of the greatest investors and compounders that the world's ever seen?
Well, Warren is not only a very good thinker and a good learner, which is important, but Warren has a big, strong fiduciary gene. He cares about what happens to the shareholders. Warren and I were lucky in that the early shareholders were people who trusted us when we were young and didn't have a reputation and so on. And naturally, we feel an exceptional loyalty to those people. And of course, naturally, they're all dead now, but we're still loyal to them. Warren and I still care what happens to the Berkshire shareholders. A lot. And I think that helps us. I think that it helps if you're good at loyalty. Go ahead, Becky.
Okay, so Bala Thirapanambakam writes in and says that many large companies, including Meta, which owns Facebook, and various insurances, are choosing to self-insure against liability, either for directors or for the business risks. If it's carried to extremes, as it no doubt will be over time, this could cause potential systemic issues. Would you share your thoughts on this, please? He says he's been a shareholder of Berkshire Hathaway for 16 years and thanks you for your stewardship and sharing your thoughts generously with the younger generations with forums like these.
In my own life, I'm a big self-insurer, and so is Warren. It's ridiculous for me to carry fire insurance on my houses because I could so easily rebuild a house if it burned down. So why would I want to bother fooling around with a claims process and all kinds of things? So if insurance, you should insure against things you can't afford to pay for yourself. Mm-hmm. But if you can afford to take the bumps, some unusual expense coming along doesn't really hurt you that much, why would you want to fool around with some insurance company? If your house burned down, I would just write a check and rebuild it. And all intelligent people do it my way. I won't say all, but maybe I should say all intelligent people should do it my way. There should be way more self-insurance in life. There's a lot of waste. You're paying when you buy insurance for the other fellow's frauds. And there's a lot of fraud in life. And if you can afford to take the risk yourself and not fool around with claims and this and that and commissions and time, of course you should self-insure. It's simpler and so forth. Think of what I've saved in my life. I never carried, I think once but with one exception, I never carried collision insurance on a car. And once I got rich, I stopped carrying fire insurance on houses. I just self-insure.
It's a little bit of a surprising take for the guy who's vice chairman at a big insurance company.
That is the right way to do it.
Seriously.
What?
That's a little bit of a surprising take from a guy who's a vice chairman at Berkshire, which has so many insurance companies.
Well, but I'd rather tell it the way it is than tell it in a way that helps Berkshire. I'm not going to tell it differently than I think it really is just because it's better for Berkshire. Even though it's bad for Berkshire, I want to tell you, if you can afford to self-insure, self-insure.
Even on things like medical? I just think you might think you can afford these things.
No, that is different. Your insurer pays the doctor in the hospital is a small fraction of what you pay. So that's a different kind of calculus. Everything in medicine is, the cost of American medical care and the medical insurance, it's a disgrace. If you go to Singapore, you will find that they do the whole thing better than we do, and it costs 20% of what we pay.
And again, my audio was out.
And by the way, I have no idea of how to get from where we are to where Singapore is, because all the people that are getting all that extra money fight like fierce tigers to hold on to it.
Right.
And they control boards and cities and states and every other guy. So I don't know how to fix the costs in American health care. They're totally out of control. And Warren tried to fix it with Amazon and all that stuff. He failed too. Everybody's failed. Everybody in America has a marvelous record failing in handling our cost of medicines.
Matt McAllister writes in, and I realized he's asked a couple of questions. I didn't realize this was a repeat send-in, but I like the questions. He said, what are some of the most important things that we need to know about Greg Abel? Have you experienced examples of him also being a learning machine? And if so, could you share one?
Yeah, well, Greg is just sensational at being a business leader, both as a thinker and as a doer. And he's also sensationally good at smoothly getting things done through other people. So he's a very remarkable human being. And Berkshire is very lucky to have him. And he's also just a tremendous learning machine. You can argue that he's just as good as Warren as learning all kinds of things. And one of the interesting things about Greg is there's some things he's better at than Warren is. And Warren knows that, and he just keeps dumping on Greg everything that Greg can do better, and it's a lot. And so the system at Berkshire is working pretty damn well. We're very lucky to have a 92-year-old that's as good shape as Warren, and we're very lucky to have a chief executive like Greg. Greg is very remarkable. Greg is trusted by utility regulators, and rightly so. He is trying to run all those utilities as if he were the regulator. Now, how many people think that way? But it's such a smart way to think.
You mean just from a show of good faith?
Yeah, why not why not do it the way that you'd want it done if you were on the other side of the transaction? How can you fail if you treat other people the way you'd like to be treated yourself? It's the golden rule. Of course it works.
All right, someone named Jim writes in, and I asked this question because I got a lot of similar ones just in terms of investments, but this one is probably a question that a lot of people, as they start to get up 65 and beyond, start to wonder. He just says, would you recommend I take Social Security when I'm 67 or wait till I'm 70 when I'll receive more per month?
Well, I can't make that choice for you. It depends. If you know you're going to be dead pretty soon, I go ahead and have more money to spend. If you think you may live a long time, you may have a different calculus. And I would say that most people who are healthy and so forth and who have a pretty good life expectancy, they're wise to defer the Social Security taking and take more money later.
I guess it's optimistic thinking, too. If you're thinking that you're going to live a long time, that's the way to play it out.
Mm-hmm. Well, what do you do, Becky?
Well, I'm not 65 yet, so I haven't thought about it yet. I'm waiting. My guess is I would probably work longer.
I don't think you're going to need Social Security, Becky. I'm not worried about you.
I think I would work longer. I'm naturally conservative. So,
yeah.
Leping Wuyang writes in, you urged the U.S. government to ban cryptocurrencies as China has done. I have a more general question. With boom and bust cycles in different countries in history, what should a good government do and not do for economic growth?
Well, what you've got to do if you want growing GDP per capita, which is what everybody should want, you've got to have most of the property in private hands so that most of the people who are making decisions about how property is to be cared for own the property in question. And that makes the whole system so efficient that GDP per capita grows. In a system where you have easy exchanges due to a currency system and so on. And so that's the main way of civilization getting rich, is having all these exchanges and having all the property in private hands. If you like violin lessons and I need your money, when we make a transaction, we're gaining on both sides. So of course GDP goes like crazy when you got a bunch of people who are spending their own money and owning their own businesses and so on. And nobody in the history of the world that I'm aware of has ever gotten from hunter-gathering to modern civilization except through a system where most of the property was privately owned. A lot of freedom of exchange. And by the way, I just said something that's perfectly obvious, but isn't really taught that way in most education. you can take a course in economics in college and not know what I just said. They don't teach it exactly the same way. Anyway.
That would be your best suggestion.
I love.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. This one comes in from Matt, and he says, throughout your experience with Berkshire Hathaway, what are a few of the things that have surprised you most based upon some of your previous rational thoughts and ideas? Also, how have you used some of those surprises in your quest to become a better learning machine? These are all.
Well, I would say some of the things that surprised me the most was how much dies. The business world is very much like the physical world, where all the animals die in the course of improving all the species so they can live in niches and so forth. All the animals die and eventually all the species die. That's the system. And when I was young, I didn't realize that same system applied to what happens in capitalism to all the businesses. They're all on their way to dying is the answer, so that other things can replace them and live. And it causes some remarkable deaths. Imagine having Kodak die. It was one of the great trademarks of the world. There was nobody that didn't use film. They dominated film. They knew more about the chemistry of film than anybody else on earth. And of course, the whole damn business went to zero. And look at Xerox was once owned the world. It's just a pale shrink. It's just nothing compared to what it once was. So practically everything dies if you on a big enough time scale. When I was young enough, that was just as obvious then. I didn't see it for a while. You know, things that looked eternal and had been around for a long time, I thought wouldn't likely be that way when I was old. But a lot of them have disappeared. Practically everything dies in business. None of the eminence lasts forever. Think of all the great department stores. Think of how long they were the most important thing in their little community. They were way ahead of everybody in furnishing credit, convenience in all seasons, you know, convenience back and forth, use the same banks of elevators and so forth, multiple floors. It looked like they were eternal. And they're basically all dying or dead. And so that once I understood that better, I think it made me a better investor, I think.
I mean, the same can be said for managers. I've talked with Doug McMillan of Walmart, who carries around in his wallet, like on him, he carries around a list of the top retailers over the decades, and nobody's ever the same. You know, you get
yes, who are gone. Yes. Of course, retailers live in terror because you can die. Some guy gets a better way of doing it, and you just die, like those department stores did.
The ones that you invested in early on, you mean? Is it Baltimore?
Well, no, most of think of the department stores that are gone, just chain after chain after chain in big downtown. That they're not weakened, they're gone, dead. And to have IBM have the huge position it once had in terms of utter dominance, and now it's just one of the also-rans. And it's still an admirable place. I'm sure they have a lot of talent left in IBM. It doesn't help you. You die even though you're talented and hardworking.
Arthur Kahn writes in, and he's a Daily Journal shareholder who lives in Toronto. And he says, Mr. Munger, while many of us admire you and look up to you, I want to ask, who were some of the people you most admired and looked up to? What was it about them that made them so special?
Well, some of the best people I would argue that Jim Sinegal at Costco was about as well adapted for the executive career he got. And by the way, he didn't go to Wharton, he didn't go to the Harvard Business School. He started work at age 18 in a store, and he rose to be CEO at Costco. In effect, he was a founder under a man named Sal Price. And I would argue that what he accomplished in his own lifetime was one of the most remarkable things in the whole history of business, in the history of the world. Jim Sinegal, in his life. He's still very much alive, but he had one business throughout his whole life, basically. And he just got so damn good at it. There was practically nothing he didn't understand, large or small. And there aren't that many Jim Senegals. And I'll tell you somebody else, for a job of the kind he has, Greg Abel, in a way, is just as good as Greg Sinegal was. Yeah, he has a kind of a genius for the way he handles people and so forth and problems. And I can't tell you how I admire somebody that has enough sense to kind of run these utilities as though he were the regulator. He's not trying to pass on the cost because he can do it. He's trying to do it the way he'd want it done if he were the regulator instead of the executive. Of course, that's the right way to run a utility. But how many are really run that way? So there's some admirable business people out there, and I've been lucky to have quite a few of them involved in my life. The guy who ran TTI was a genius. TTI is a Berkshire subsidiary. Yeah. New Delhi Journal, people think how lucky you'd be if we still had our monopoly on publishing our cases or something. We'd be like TTI. Well, TTI has just marched from triumph to triumph. And it was run by a guy, he got fired and created the business.
He got fired from where?
He invented the whole some place, it was a defense contractor, I forget which one.
General Dynamic, maybe, or
Yeah, I can't remember exactly. But he was a terrific guy. And he ran the business for us. He wouldn't let us raise his pay. How many people have the problem with their managers? They won't allow you to raise their pay.
It's pretty rare.
Yeah.
Charlie, I spoke with a friend of yours yesterday, and his question that he had for you is, what quality has helped you the most in life?
Well, that's easy. Rationality. If you're just not crazy, you have a big advantage over 95% of the people. Because most people have all kinds of crazy patches. And if you just are consistently not crazy, you get a big advantage in life. And if you're patient and a gratification deferrer, in addition to being not crazy, then it's practically a cinch. And then if you're exceptionally good at satisfying your commitments to other people, then you just automatically improved your resources and your chances in life enormously. And it's so simple. And why don't more people do it? It's an interesting question. I don't think you can educate your children to do it automatically. I think if you have 10 children, you'll have some that are a lot better than others at doing this.
Is it harder with success, age, wealth to hold on to rationality?
I think it's always hard, but you get better at it if you get good at it young and keep practicing. But it's never easy. if you had to, that question somebody asked, what one stock would you buy if you had to just rely on that one stock only for your sole living expenses? You weren't allowed to earn any income at all. You just had to invest $1 million and live on that one stock. How many people would give an intelligent answer to that question in America? I don't think it's 1 in 100. They wouldn't even know how to begin.
I think one of my favorite things that I've heard you say, and it's something I repeat often to a lot of people, is whatever you are, age and wealth makes you more so. You came up with that a while ago. What led you to that? And do you have any?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Do you have any? I guess.
No, I think that's true. That we all tend to, we all tend to get a little more so in every way, and I thought of that when I woke up this morning and put on my trousers. And I thought, I really economized in buying those trousers. Why am I economizing in my trouser buying? But the habit is just so ingrained that I can't stop.
And I'd like to circle back to a question on Daily Journal to wrap things up. Daily Journal and some of your holdings. This question comes in from Moshe Sable, who says, in a previous shareholder meeting back around 2018, you spoke about BYD and said Journal Technologies is not quite BYD, but added that, by the way, it might work out just like BYD. Now, a few years on, do you still find Journal Technologies can turn out similar to BYD?
Well, it won't be as fast, that I guarantee you. And it won't be as great. I can also practically guarantee that. BYD is one of the most remarkable venture capital type successes in the history of the world. He was the 8th son of a peasant. Had an older brother that recognized his young kid was his younger brother was a genius. And the older brother sacrificed himself to get this peasant son into some good engineering school, and he became an engineering professor and then an entrepreneur. And how many times you get a story like that? And imagine buying a little bankrupt auto company in China and turning it into something that this year they're going to sell more electrical cars than anybody else in the world. At a time when electrical cars are hot. And it's a remarkable story, but again, a very unusual human being, Wan Chun-fu. And by the way, in his case, it wouldn't have happened if Wan Chun-fu hadn't been so unusual.
Unusual how?
He's a damn genius, and he's been thinking about the right things 17 hours a day all his life. He's a workaholic, and he can do things that ordinary human beings can't do.
Is that the favorite stock you've ever purchased, BYD? Or Costco?
Well, I would say, yes, I have never helped do anything at Berkshire that was as good as BYD, and I only did it once. Our $270,000 investment there is worth about $8 billion now, or maybe $9 billion. And that's a pretty good rate of return.
Yeah, it's more than pretty good.
Yeah. We don't do it all the time. We do it once in a lifetime. Yeah. Now, we have had some other successes too, but I don't think hardly anything like that. We made one better investment. You know what it was? We paid an executive recruiter to get us an employee, and he came up with Ajit Jain. And the return that Ajit has made us, compared to the amount we paid the executive recruiter. That was our best investment at Berkshire, was paying an executive recruiting firm to get a Saji chain. But again, it only happened once.
Yeah, that's quite an investment, too. Charlie, I just want to thank you for all your time today.
All right, we're all through, I guess.
And being so generous.
I guess our meeting is over.
And we'll turn it back over to Charlie and
I'm
Stephen.
still here to do one more with you people. We've been at this quite a few years. So my best to all of you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Becky.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Charlie.